So last week we discussed the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer, or gave an overview of the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer, one of the most iconic vessels fielded by the Galactic Empire, and one of the most imposing vessels to ever serve as the backbone of a major military. But in that video I mentioned that there were two variants of the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer, the Imperial-I and the Imperial-II, and today we're going to focus on the first variant, the Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer. I'm Colin, and this is Sci-Fi Deep Dive. Remember, if you enjoyed this video, to head down below and hit that subscribe button. So the Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer is the original variant of the class. Like I mentioned, there were two classes, the Imperial-I and the updated Imperial-II, which came into service about 5 years before the Battle of Yavin, but really became far more common in between the Battle of Yavin and the Battle of Hoth. So today we're going to take a much closer look at the first variant, the way the Imperial-Class Star Destroyer was originally designed, the Imperial-I. Let's start with armament. The main armament of the Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer was its vast array of turbolasers. The standard Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer was armed with 60 XX-9 heavy turbolaser batteries and 60 NK-7 ion cannon batteries. These formed the basis of its primary armament. But on top of that, it sported 6 heavy dual turbolaser turrets, 2 heavy ion cannon turrets, 2 heavy quad turbolaser turrets, 3 triple medium turbolaser turrets, 2 hard-mounted medium turbolasers, and 10 Q7 tractor beams. So, as you can see, most of these weapons are various types of turbolasers. As I've mentioned before, the Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer was entirely based around ship-to-ship combat, and was really bristling with turbolasers. I mean, that's a lot of turbolasers. But on top of that turbolaser armament, the Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer was capable of carrying 72 TIE variant fighters, which could vary from the standard Imperial TIE Fighter to the TIE Interceptors or TIE Bombers. A standard Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer would also be capable of carrying 8 Lambda-class shuttles, 20 all-terrain assault transport walkers, and 30 all-terrain scout transports. This left them with a fairly substantial deployable ground complement, and on top of this wide array of ground equipment, they could carry almost 10,000 embarked stormtroopers to carry out ground operations. The original Imperial-I Class Star Destroyers were likely deployed right around the end of the Clone Wars. Whether or not these are during the final days of the war or nearly immediately after is not known in canon, but we do know in Legends they actually were present in some major battles at the end of the war, like the Battle of Coruscant. At which point they were not known as Imperial Class, but instead under their Republic name, Imperator. But after the rise of the Empire and the fall of the Galactic Republic, the Empire made the key shift from the old Republic doctrines to something called the Tarkin Doctrine, which mandated that the Empire should sort of rule through fear, focusing on having the most intimidating force possible to deter any uprisings or opposition to what the Empire desires. One of the key moves in this was trying to have the most intimidating naval force, and the massive Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer was the perfect fit. Bristling with turbolasers, any faction with anything close to a navy wouldn't really think of going up against something that, well, battleship-like. So basically, the entire premise behind the Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer was what we would know here as battleship diplomacy. Have the biggest guns, park them in the right place, and you can get anyone to really do what you tell them to. And it actually worked for a while. The Imperial-Class Star Destroyers were horribly intimidating, and they did their job, as any faction with a decent navy was basically crushed if they came up against even a single vessel of this class, based on their size and armament alone. But things started to change as the Rebel Alliance started to gain steam. With the retirement of the Venator and the rise of the Imperial class, there became a key flaw in the mainstay warship of the Empire's military, and that is the fact that its entire armament is turbolasers. No point defense cannons, no regular laser cannons, it's all turbolasers, ion cannons, and tractor beams. This made the Imperial-I Class Star Destroyer particularly vulnerable to a particular type of attacker, and that is light and nimble starfighters. This meant that Rebel hit-and-run attacks were very effective against Imperial-Class Star Destroyers, and while they rarely totally destroyed Imperial-Class Star Destroyers, they could do serious damage before withdrawing and basically leaving with no casualties because the Star Destroyer's weapons really can't engage starfighters. And this is where the Empire started to run into major issues with the Imperial-I. The Imperial-I, being based entirely around intimidation, came back really to bite it, because, like I've mentioned several times, all of their weapons are turbo lasers, and the Rebel Alliance are starting to catch on that their fighters are super effective against these. And that's one of the reasons why the Empire ultimately made the transition from the Imperial-I to the Imperial-II, which is slightly more well-rounded and at least has some capability to engage Rebel starfighters. However, ultimately, even with the rise of the Imperial-II Class Star Destroyer, many Imperial-Is would remain in service, a lot of them actually being modified to have the upgrades to convert them into Imperial-IIs, but some still remained in their original configuration, even through to the end of the war and beyond. It's likely that there were at least a handful of Imperial-I Class Star Destroyers in service to Imperial warlords in the sort of post-Imperial age, and maybe even some in service to the First Order, although my assumption is they would be more likely to phase those out in favor of other vessels like Imperial-IIs or Resurgent-class ships. But both the Imperial-I and the Imperial-II together form what's known as the Imperial class. And if you'd like to learn about the story of the Imperial class as a whole and some of the reasons and design choices behind them, I'll leave a link up here to my video on that. And I want you to let me know down in the comments, within context of the rise of the Galactic Empire and in its very early days, whether you think it makes sense for a galactic government to field a warship like the Imperial-I class, with basically nothing but turbo lasers. After all, keep in mind, the Empire didn't really expect the Rebel Alliance. And if you have anything you want to see me cover in Star Wars, leave it down below in the comments. Last but not least, if you enjoyed this video, head down below, hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the bell icon so you get notified when I upload new videos. So for Sci-Fi Deep Dive, I'm Colin, and I will see you next time.